Okay, let's continue on our quest to turn some grape juice into the magical elixir we call wine. And we're going to now pick apart the process into a series of small vignettes. Yeah, I'm going to do a small vignette. I'm going to try, all right? A series of small vignettes that focus on very specific fermentation options that the winemaker can employ in order to make the great diversity and variety and uniqueness of wines that are available to you from across the planet. These are particular things that a winemaker can utilize, and they can do them or not do them at all. They can do them a little or do them a lot, and whatever options they choose to do in whatever amounts can radically influence what you'll be drinking out of that bottle in 6 months or 6 years or 16 years from now. It's all about fermentation options up to the winemaker. And let's pick up where we left off. Let's talk about some must. Must we? We must. Now, as referred to at the end of the last lecture, we want to retard or slow down microbiological processes as much as possible in the fruit as we're pulling it from the vineyard into the winery. So it could be that everything can't happen instantaneously. Every winery only has so much equipment, no matter how small they are, no matter how big they are. They have so much equipment. They can only process fruit so quickly. They only have so many fermentation barrels or buckets or whatever. So when fruit comes in, it comes in and you got to deal with it. And to keep it as fresh as possible and to limit microbiological processes as much as possible, you might want to chill that fruit itself as soon as it comes in off the vine by putting it in the fridge or reefer flat while it's waiting to be processed. But even after you have started to process it, we talked about last lecture, after we've crushed and destemmed or crushed and destemmed and pressed, you may want to chill down the resultant juice or the resultant must in order to settle it down even further. Put it back in the fridge, let it chill before we even move it on to the fermentation process. Cooling down the fruit, then cooling down the juice or cooling down the must slows the oxidation process that we've chatted about already, and also allows more skin contact with the red grape juice and those red grape skins, aka that grape slushy slurry that we're calling must. It's all about how much skin contact those floating around red skins have with that juice. Skin contact. That's what this section is all about. Must manipulation. How much skin contact are you going to allow? And I'm not talking this kind of skin contact. I'm talking, baby, this kind of skin contact. A little bit of cultural porn going on right there. So this is a brief sketch of skin contact, aka must. How much time do you allow the juice, that liquid, that fluid, to hang out with those skins, or vice versa? How long do you let the skins and the seeds and the stalks hang out with your juice/liquid? However long you allow this to happen, depending on if you're starting with white grapes or red grapes, and the time you allow that skin contact is a direct result, or produces as a direct result, a white wine versus a red wine versus a pink wine versus an orange wine. Yeah, there's orange wines now too. Now this process I'm referring to is called, wait for it, maceration. Yeah, already talked about grape porn, so I said maceration, not the other word, maceration. In winemaking, maceration is the process where the phenolic materials of the grape, and that is the tannins, the colors, the flavor compounds, are leached from the skins, from the seeds, from the pulp, from the stems, whatever junk's in there, leached from them and put into the juice/must, depending on if you're talking about white grape juice or red grape juice, which is must. Other products do this too, by the way. This is not unique to wine production. If you think about it, there are lots of different products which have a liquid that they stick stuff into in order to infuse it with flavors and aromas and maybe even colors. And I think particularly of liqueurs, things like Campari or schnapps, or fruit brandies. Benedictine, really, you go into the liquor store, anything that's labeled cacao cassis or cacao, creme de cassis, these are alcoholic products, usually a high alcohol like brandies, that they stick stuff into and steep out the flavors. And fruit brandies are a good one because that's just distilled wine up to a very high alcohol percentage, and then you stick fruit into it, so it takes on fruity flavors. For those of us from this particular part of the world, here in Appalachia, think of moonshine. Moonshine is a liquor, and it's searingly hot, high alcohol. But if you've had really great moonshine, somebody's put peaches in it, right? Raspberries in it. Oh, yeah. And what's happening there? It's leaching out the flavors of that particulate matter that's stuck into the liquid and flavoring the rest of the beverage. Even lambic fruit beers, for you beer geeks out there, these are wildly fermented beers that as they're fermenting the grain and it's turning into beer, they dump a bunch of fresh fruit into. So you can get cherry lambic and raspberry lambic beers out of Belgium. Delicious. Heck, if you actually think about it in the abstract, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, this is the way you make tea. Think about it. You're taking hot boiling water, all right, the liquid, and you're taking dry tea leaves and you're going to stick them into the liquid, steep them in a tea bag in order for the liquid to take on the aroma and flavor attributes of the crap you're sticking into it. That's what maceration is all about for wine. I'm pretty good, right? Right off the top of my head. So in my mind, and what I'm talking about particularly for this little vignette, maceration, must manipulation, as I like to call it, because I love alliteration. Must manipulation is alliteration. But this whole maceration process, to me, is really all about the color extraction. And I know. For you winemakers and viticulture geeks and wine geeks, you are going to say, wait for there, Professor. With the skin contacts in must, you're also getting other phenolic materials like tannins. That's true. Flavor compounds, true. Trace amounts of acids, trace amounts of sugars, trace amounts of minerals like potassium and other stuff. And yes, that is true, but it's mostly about color extraction. And I love that all of these other things are being extracted out because it's at such microscopic nano levels, we don't even know really what's going on. But I can tell you what's going on in the big picture. That's what makes wines unique. There are things at an elemental level that are being extracted that we don't know exactly what, 3 parts per million of potassium and this many parts per million of this other element and this amount of acids that's being squeezed right out of the skins. We don't know exactly how that affects the final wine, but I know this. It makes wines unique, and that's what I love about them. So it depends on how much this maceration skin contact you have will wildly affect what you're going to have at the end in the bottle, but it's mostly affecting the color of what you're going to have at the end of the bottle. Okay? Because, as you well know, I think by this point in the class, when you take these grapes, a black one and a white one, and you squeeze them, ooh, the juice is clear. And that's for a white grape, a green grape, a yellow grape, a pink grape, a blue grape, a red grape, and a black grape. The juice is clear. Okay. Second exception for my viticulture geek friends out there. Yes, there are some bizarre hybrids of non-vinifera vines which do have the juice actually tinged, pigmented with dark anthocyanins. Those are rare, and I don't care. Those are hybrids of stuff from North America or maybe even Central Asia that are non-vinifera, so they ain't made into wine anyway, and they don't count. Rare, don't care. Okay, just so you know, in your head, put this in your brain. When you're drinking a glass of wine and you see color, you instinctually should understand, this wine has had some maceration. It has sat, the juice has sat with the skins for a certain amount of time and extracted out this color. Now, again, there's always exceptions to everything, so maybe a third exception in this short lecture. Yes, there are other parts of the process that can add color to wine, namely barrel aging. If you barrel age a white wine, the barrel itself, you can barrel age tequila, by the way, and that's one of the reasons why tequila is is clear or gold or brown, right? That's all from the barrel. And the same is true with wine. There will be extracts from the wood itself that can color the wines. With red wines, there's so much color from the skins, the barrel coloring is of no consequence. With white wines, yes, if they've been aged for a while, yeah, they'll pick up some color. Some. I mean, when it comes to red wines, 99.99999% of the color comes from the skins. The color that comes from barrels is negligible. You would never be able to tease it out, okay? So, therefore, the contact between the juice and the skins is essential for color extraction, and that's what determines what the final color of the wine will be. If the wine is super black, if it's super dark red, if it's just standard dark red, if it's medium red, if it's light red, if it's pink even, that color came from the skins of the grapes. That color came from stuff that was leached out of the skins in the maceration process with must. So, how much time does it take for the must to sit around? How much time do you allow for the juice to sit around with the skins in order to get different colors, which will, in the end, result in different colored wines? Haha! I'm so glad you asked. Let's start with white wines. You see, there's great color variation from white wines around the planet, and that's got a lot to do with the grapes themselves, but not so much with the time on skins, because, as you may have picked up on by now, when it comes to producing white wines, you may have zero contact between the skins, stems, and seeds and the grape juice. Maybe you don't even crush your white grapes before you start turning it into juice, which you're going to turn into wine. Maybe you pull this sucker in, you pull in your Pinot Gris off the vine, and you don't even crush it. You're like, nope, stick it straight into the press. Aha! And you know the difference between crushing and pressing now. Maybe you're going to stick this straight into the press and squeeze it right now, let all the juice drain out, and filter off all of the skins, all of the seeds, and all the stalks. You don't want no contact. You can do that. That will allow for zero interaction, and you'll pick up no additional phenolics or tannins or anything else. And I think of, and I won't swear to this, but you know, if you understand the base logic of how this stuff works, then you can start to figure out wines. So I will not swear to you that this is the way it happens, but Vinho Verde wines out of, say, Portugal, they're almost the color of water. So my instinct is they have not had any contact. They probably weren't crushed. Those grapes weren't crushed. They pulled those suckers off the vine probably early in the season, maybe one of the first things to be harvested. Very high acids, very low color. Squeeze them, press them, get them out of there, start the juice fermenting. Other wines have a deeper, richer hue of yellow. Maybe they spend a little bit of time because, as we suggested, maybe the winemaker wants a little bit of interaction with their white grape juice and the white grape skins and or the white grape seeds and or the white grape stalks in order to extract out some of the minimal tannins and the minimal phenols that are in those plant parts to beef up the profile of their white wine a little bit. However, it depends on, again, what style of wine the winemaker's shooting for. If you're going for a white wine that's light, super light even, and super fruity, then no. You don't want any of this stuff. You want the juice out and get this stuff out of the way. And that's that. But if you want something that's a little, got a little more umph, and you'll be able to taste this in some white wines. You'll taste a white wine, it's like, this is I get a little tannic component. I get a little something, a little vegetal, a little something. It probably did spend at least a couple hours, maybe an overnight storage in the refrigerator, macerating with its skins. You heard it here first. Also do remember, though, before we leave white wines, and I should have pulled up one, white, lots of different shades of white, but I should also point out that because all grape juice is cleared, no matter what grape it's from, you can have white Merlot. You heard it here first. You're going to live to see white Cabernet Sauvignon and white Malbec and white Pinot Noir. Oh, wait a minute, you can already get white Pinot Noir. It's called Blanc de Noir, type of champagne. We'll get to that in a later lecture. But people always want to experiment and try new things and be the first to market. So you're going to see a lot of red grapes that are turned into white wine because they can. And that brings me to an interesting question that you should know. for this class and for the rest of your lives. Must you have must to make white wine? No, you must not. You can make this white wine with no skin contact at all, and I'd venture a guess this one did not have any skin contact. Remember, must is not just juice, it's juice in the skins and the seeds and everything else stuck together, okay, or all in a big slurry. So must you have must for white wines? No. Must you have must to make red wines? Yes! Yes, indeed you do. You must have skin contact to extract the color to make a red wine. Therefore, you must have must. Got it? Okay, cool. All right, then. How do you get pink wines? Oh, man. Here are some pink wines from around the world. And you'll notice that, again, there's great variety in the shades of pink. It's definitely not white. It's definitely not red. It's pink, or more technically, rosé wines come from a very specific time and type of maceration process. So a lot of people, I think, are like, oh, where do you get pink wines from? Do you get pink wines from light pink grapes that just don't have a lot of color and therefore only a little bit of color comes out and it's pink? No, there are pink grapes, by the way. But no, that's not how you make rosés. Do you get pink wines by taking a red wine and mixing it with a white wine? And you white, red, together pink. Maybe. Actually, probably some bulk wine producers that produce rosé maybe do that. But 99% no. And rosé wines of quality, definitely not. No, if you're going to make a rosé, here's one of my favorites. Tavel, or Tavel. It's a French wine region down in the Rhone. They only make rosé wines, this region. Don't know how to spell it? There it is. Tavel, all right? Tavel. If you're going to make pink wines, rosé wines, you don't really mix wines together. You start with some red or black or blue wine grapes. From Tavel, they start with Grenache, which is a red grape, Grenache Noir. And because red or black or blue wine grapes got the color we want, white grapes don't. White grapes ain't got none of that color. But Grenache is really dark. It's a really dark skinned grape, and you can make really darky ink black wine from it. We don't want all that to make this. We only want a little. We only want some of the color that the skins have to offer, not all of it. So it's all a matter of how much time you allow the clear juice, once it's pressed, to come in contact with those skins after the crushing, destemming, and pressing process. AKA, how long do you allow the maceration process? And for different rosés, they come in a wide variety of colors and lightness of bodies, by the way. And that's because it's up to the winemaker. You can do 2 hours skin contact, 2 hours maceration. You can do 12 hours. You can do 24 to 48 hours. You can do, I guess, whatever you want. But if you left it on there for months, then it's a red wine. So at some point, you're going to allow a minimal amount of maceration, a minimal amount of juice to skin contact, and you're going to pull it off, depending upon how much color and tannins and phenols that you want to extract. And that's what's so fantastic about rosé wines, by the way, is they're the perfect marriage between red and white wines. They have the white wine lightness of body, but because they're made from red grapes, they have interesting and complex red grape flavors and aromas and tannic structure. So they're right in the middle. That's what a true rosé is. Now, can you get rosés from all over the planet? Sure you can. Anywhere that makes red wines, you can take any red black grape and make it into a rosé. Or you can make it into a red wine, but you can make it into a rosé. You know this already. You can make it into a white wine if you want to, but you can make it into a rosé. Now that we're on this section, now that we're in pink, all right? So do understand this. Rosés come from all over the planet. It's all depending on the winemaker, how much skin contact they have, is related to how dark the color and how the lightness of the body of the finished wine is. And rosé is simply designating a color. This is a rosé wine. Rosé is not, repeat, not designating a sweetness level. And this is confusing for Americans because California started making tons of pink wine. Maybe you've heard of white Zinfandel, pink Zinfandel wine. Zinfandel's a black grape. There you go. So they took this black dark grape and they just allowed for a little bit of skin maceration, skin contact maceration time, and made it into a pink wine. But California got famous for decades of making that into a sweet wine. And so most Americans are like, oh, pink wine equals sweet, like cotton candy. No. Most European rosés, if not 99% of them, are bone dry. So it's the style of a bone dry white or red wine out of Europe, but with this color, okay? So rosé designates color, not sweetness level. And again, just compare a California white Zinfandel with any wine from the Rhone, or Tavel in particular. Got it? Okay. Let's move on to red wines then. And now it's exceedingly easy because red wine is red wine is red wine, and it's hard to tell the difference between different bottles that may be just slightly red wine in color, or medium colored red wine, or deep colored red wine, because they all just kind of look red when they're stuck in the bottle. You have to pour it out into a smaller glass. And with red wines, it's actually quite easy now that we understand the maceration process and the whole skin contact which extracts colors, because red is red. And when it comes to making red wine, for most red wines, you want maceration to the max, baby. That's typical. So the entire crushing, destemming, then movement of the must that produced straight into the fermentation vessel. Yeah, you may chill it out overnight before you move it to the fermentation vessel. You may take it straight to the fermentation vessel. It doesn't matter. But you're going to take all that red wine, potential red wine must, and get it going. And you're going to leave the skins on there the whole time it's doing what we call the primary fermentation. Remember, the must is that slurry of grape skins and the juice and the seeds and the stems and whatever else was left in there if you didn't sort properly. And this is constant contact for weeks to months, depending on how long the fermentation process is going to occur on that particular batch of wine. And therefore, because you're allowing constant contact for weeks to months, you're going to get the maximum extraction of colors, of tannins, of phenols the entire time. How much, how big, how full-bodied, how much color that red wine has at the end of that process is now not so much determined on maceration time, because you've just maxed it out. It now starts to be affected by, well, how ripe did the grapes get that year? How much color did the skins get that year? How much phenols did the skin get that year? Because you're maxing it out. And so you get your Cabernet Sauvignon or your Pinot Noir, your Malbec from that year, maybe you're all from the same vineyard, different wine, you're going to max out all you can get from them. So different wines will now start to separate themselves out when you get to the red category. Not so much on maceration time, but what's the original fruit look like that you were using? Got it? Okay. Again, that's easy. Reds, go all the way. Now, I'm going to shift to something which I have never done before just because I love this class so much. Talked about white, talked about rosé, talked about red. What's left? Dude, if you live long enough, you see everything. And now we're talking about orange wines. And there are always bizarre exceptions to the general rules, which I tend to ignore until they become too popular. They become too trendy for me to ignore. And so I've already had a whole bunch of students ask me, what's orange wine? I'm like, okay, I'll deal with orange wine now. And this particular section on must manipulation is the perfect place to actually talk about what an orange wine is and how you make them, because it's all about must manipulation. Orange wines get their name, and you might see these things from, again, all around the world. The Italians used to make them for a long time. I've had good ones out of Georgia, out of Croatia. Let me hold up the paper so you can kind of get a sense of the color. That's kind of a rosé, but it takes on a more, not so much pink or red, but a copper-colored, salmon-tinged kind of color. And these orange wines get their name from this darker, slightly orangey, coppery, salmon-tinged color that comes from white grape skins. What? well, not these. These are pretty green / white, but do keep in mind that it's not black and white when it comes to grape skin color. We generally talk in generalities about it's red or it's white. It's red or it's white. For these two, it's easy. But there's actually all sorts of gradation in between. So there are some pink grape, and there are some slightly grayish, bluish grapes that aren't really black, but they're not really white. And one to pick on in particular is Pinot Gris. Pinot Gris, that you know it as Pinot Grigio out of Italy, but Pinot Gris is what they call it up in France. And it does have this bluish, light bluish, pinkish, grayish hue, depending upon the season. And what you can do to make these things called orange wines, which are, again, becoming the new rage, is you basically do the opposite of a rosé and you do something more like a red. So even though it's a white grape, you're going to crush, you may press, or you may just go ahead and make it into a white grape must. Are you with me now? That's atypical. And in these grapes that do have some kind of different colors, and even this one, if you made this white grape into a full-on must, smashed up all the seeds and stems and skins and just allowed it to hang out, not for 24 hours, not for 2 hours, not for 24 hours like a rosé, but went ahead and did the fermentation for a month or two, just like you're making a red wine, you're going to get these strangely tinged, orange tinged wines, which really are quite unique. They are typically left alone from anywhere. The maceration period, again, it's closer to a white grape than a red grape, but you're going to do a maceration process on this somewhere in the middle pink purplish grape from 4 days to maybe over a year. Maybe you allow the whole fermentation process to occur and you actually just start aging the wine in the barrel with the skin still on there. Maybe even the seeds still in there. This is an atypical process. And orange winemaking is typically a very natural winemaking process as well, meaning it's maceration makes it orange, but they also use very few additives, and sometimes they don't even introduce unique yeast. They let it be wildly, spontaneously fermented, which I told you last lecture winemakers don't do. They typically kill it because they want to control the fermentation. With orange wines, these winemakers are saying, no, we're just going to let nature take its course. Wildly ferment it, see what happens. What's the result? The color you got. The flavors, watch out. Be sitting down if you're going to try an orange wine, which I highly recommend, and they're all the rage right now. Big, intense, wild, funky. Because they've had extended maceration, they have tannins that are way more intense than even, say, a rosé. They're semi-astringent. They're fruity, but they're funky. They're sour. That's the wild fermentation part that I'll get to in the next lecture. They're almost like a goose lambic beer, if you know what that is, or a sour beer. If you've ever had sour beers, they're quite popular all of a sudden right now too. The craft brew revolution. So they have a sourness in them. If you've ever tried sour beers before, this is the only wine that's kind of in that sour category. Again, mostly due to the wild fermentation. I say it's a very modern phenomenon. It's gotten really hip here in the last, I think, just a couple years or so. I saw them 10 years ago. So people have been experimenting with them again for the last 10 or 20 years, but it's likely that it has very ancient roots, like maybe that's probably how they made wines in ancient Georgia 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. They would not have been thinking about making fresh, fruity white wines. They're just trying to make wine. 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, Mesopotamia, they're just like, no, stick this stuff in a barrel and extract out as much as you can and stick all these grapes, smash up all the grapes, stick them in a pot, stick them in a clay pot, seal up the pot, bury the pot. That's how they used to do it back in the day. And so you're getting this wildly extended maceration with white grapes or pinkish grapes or light blue grapes that makes for these wild flavors and this really kind of different color. Due to the expanding, ever-expanding curiosity of wine drinkers that are always seeking out new products, you're seeing a modern resurgence of this. So if you just go Google orange wines, you'll probably find 10 or 20, maybe even some in local stores. I mostly bring it up here again just to teach you the lesson about the must manipulation, the skin contact, the maceration process. And this is an oddball that does it with white grape skins and for a very long period of time. So try it out. Get all orange about it. In summary, or the must manipulation, for whites and rosés. You're going to allow skin contact for no time at all for most whites, 2 to 24 to 48 hours, depending on the rosés you're trying to make. Then the juice goes into a settling tank to chill out. For reds, the maceration party may last for weeks or months. You're just going to crush, destem, put all that grapey, juicy, slushy, slurpy stuff that we now call must, and just pump it with a fire hose right from the processing station into a fermentation tank and let it rip. Remember, the longer the skins hang out with the juice, the more stuff you get out of it. So let it rip, max out the color, max out the tannins, max out the phenols to your heart's content. The pressing of that must for red wines occurs after fermentation. After. Most white wines press before fermentation. Red wines press after fermentation for this very reason, because you're trying to maximize that skin contact, not minimize it, which most white wines do. Got it? Okay. Now, when it comes to the white grape juice, which we have chilling, or the red grape juice, which is must, which is probably already fermenting, either way, let's now get to, okay, the fermentation process. The red's already going. The must is already working. The white we may have to introduce some yeast to, and that's where we're going to next. Let's introduce you to the action of yeast.